States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims is now in ceremonial session. The Honorable Robert N. Davis presiding. God bless the United States and this honorable court. Please be seated.
Good afternoon. Oh, I got a response. That's good. I like that. You guys are alive out there. I'm so excited to welcome you all to the courtroom naming ceremony. It's absolutely a thrill to see so many current and past staff here today. This is like a court family reunion. I can't wait to get to the reception. That was off the script, so. I'd also like to thank the court's outstanding staff for planning and setting up this wonderful event. Judge Peach, Judge Meredith, Alice Kearns, Patrick Barnwell always have their hands in making our events run smoothly. Greg Block, June Dumayuga, and Lori Jackson. Thank you all very much. Joining me on the bench today are active judges Mary Sholin, Coral Peach, Margaret Bartley, William Greenberg, Michael Allen, and Joe Toth. From the ranks of our senior judges, seated next to me, of course, is our guest of honor, Chief Judge Frank Nebeker. Judges Ken Kramer, William Green, Larry Hagel, William Mormon, Jack Farley, and Don Ivers in the well. Special guests this afternoon include Judge Nebeker's family members, his son Mark Nebeker, his grandson James and his wife Gabrielle Nebeker, his daughter Malia Nebeker, his grandson Quill Nebeker. And now you know what the Q means in Judge Nebeker's name. Judge Nebeker's wife, Lou, was not able to attend, but we know what a special role she played in the creation and formation of the court. I'm told she was not only Judge Nebeker's right hand during his active service here, but also became a special friend to all of the early employees of the court. The spouses of many of our active judges, or at least one of our active judges is here, Judge Peach's spouse, and many of our spouses of the senior judges are here as well. And also Shelley Steinberg is here. From the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, Chief Judge Anna Blackburn Rigsby is here. Thank you very much, Chief. And thank you again for the use of your beautiful courtroom for the investiture ceremony of Judge Falvey. I look forward to our next visit to your court.
Hopefully it'll be for one of our investigators.
Absolutely, that'll be fine. Judge John Fisher from the Court of Appeals as well, Judge Stephen Glickman, Judge Roy McLeese, Judge Phyllis Thompson, Senior Judge Vanessa Ruiz, and Judge James Belson, as I understand, is here. Also, my law school classmate and good friend, the distinguished clerk of the court, Julio Castillo, is here. Good to see you, Julio. I also understand in attendance are several law clerks and staff of the D.C. Court of Appeals. We welcome you all to our very cozy courtroom. From the Board of Veterans Appeals, my good colleague, Chairman Cheryl Mason, is here as well. Good to see you, Chairman. Thank you all for attending this very special celebration. On the continuum of time, 30 years is merely a blink of an eye, but 30 years in the eyes of the law is at least enough time to see the beginning growth of a new federal appellate court and the early stages of the development of its jurisprudence involving the delivery of fair, swift, and impartial justice to veterans. This newest federal appellate court is still a very young court, but 30 years have proven to be a fair amount of time in which to measure its progress from its fledgling early days of establishing itself as an independent court of appeals and not a part of the VA, until today, when it is beginning to exercise more and more of its statutory authority and break new ground with precedential panel decisions and class actions. So how did the 30th anniversary celebration year come about? Well, it was Judge Greenberg's fault.
Without honor and without blame.
Judge Greenberg, our resident history expert on all things touching history. I could ask Bill today what's historically significant about today's date anywhere in the world, and he'll be able to rattle off a few things. I won't ask you to do that, Bill, but I'm sure you have something. He commented one day at a meeting that this year the court was 30 years old, 2019. He suggested that we recognize the court's 30th anniversary by celebrating events throughout the year 2019. As many of you might know, it is not a given that you will get a majority of judges on any court to agree on anything. But I am pleased to tell you that in this case, there was no debate. There was almost immediate unanimity on the concept of recognizing this young court had actually been around for 30 years. The Board of Judges then began to consider ways to celebrate this court's 30th anniversary. So a number of events were suggested, and if my memory serves me correctly, among the ideas discussed was one suggested several years back by Judge Bartley, that it would be appropriate and fitting that we name our courtroom after its first chief judge, Frank Q. Nebeker. Again, the board was very quickly unanimous, and plans were put into place to host a number of 30th anniversary events during 2019, and the courtroom naming was to be one of those feature events. So today you're going to hear a few stories about Judge Nebeker, and I'll direct your attention to the back of your programs where you will find his impressive biography. I'm not going to repeat the information contained in his biography, but Judge Nebeker was nominated by President Herbert Walker Bush in April of 1989 and unanimously confirmed by the Senate as the first chief judge of this court on May 17, 1989. He came to this court with good experience because 20 years earlier, in 1969, Judge Nebeker was appointed by President Nixon to serve on the ground floor of a newly created Article I court, the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. His background as a correspondence secretary for Mrs. Eisenhower during law school, his work at the Department of Justice and the Office of Government Ethics, and his previous judicial experience all helped to prepare him to be this court's first chief judge, and a good one. Not every judge has the temperament, management skills, and vision to be a good chief judge. And indeed, not every chief judge warrants having a courtroom named after them. So I think this ceremony speaks volumes about Chief Judge Frank Nebeker. Chief Judge Nebeker presided over the first appeal filed at this court along with Judges Kramer and Farley in the case of Lee Andrew McGoy against Edward Durinsky, docket number 89-1, in November of 1989, a case that was dismissed for lack of jurisdiction. Chief Judge Nebeker, along with Judges Kramer and Farley, issued the court's first per curiam opinion in the matter of a letter from Michael Quigley, docket number 8961, December 1989, denying a request for an emergency hearing and an injunction for failure to exhaust administrative remedies. And he presided over the court's first oral argument along with Judges Kramer and Farley in Erspammer against Derwinski, docket number 89-14, February 1990. In the opinion written by Judge Farley, The court held that a decade of delay, 10 years, in resolving a claim for benefits was unreasonable, citing the 1984 Telecommunications Research and Action Center against the FCC case, we finally referred to as TRAC, from the D.C. Circuit. However, the court declined to grant the writ requested based on representations made by the Secretary that a resolution was near. So, if you conclude from this short synopsis of activities that Judge Nebeker was involved in, you might think that Judge Nebeker could do nothing without Judges Kramer and Farley. And you'd be right. And he would tell you so. Let me briefly share with you my early memories of meeting Judge Nebeker. I really don't remember our first meeting, or how we met, or where we met. I suspect that I called Judge Nebeker when I became a new judge and asked him about the court. I may have run into him at a court function later, but I remember my first impressions were of a modest and affable guy with a good sense of humor. I always thought having a good sense of humor was important. As we became friends and grew to know each other better, I remember he shared with me honest and direct answers to my questions about the court, the mission, the people, and the challenges. I appreciated his candor, hard work, and practicality. I also remember a lovely lunch he treated me to at the Cosmos Club, one to which I had never been. The Cosmos Club was founded in 1878 as a private social club for men, and women were admitted 110 years later. Members were distinguished in science, literature, and arts, a learned profession, or public service. Among its members have been 3 presidents, 2 vice presidents, a dozen Supreme Court justices, 36 Nobel Prize winners, 61 Pulitzer Prize winners, and 55 recipients of the Medal of Freedom. A pretty distinguished group of people, right? But this group would not be so distinguished without the additional membership of Chief Judge Nebeker. I thought to myself how nice it was of him to invite me to lunch to such a historic place. But the real piece de resistance was that he picked me up in this classic gold Lincoln town car. Vintage. Frank, what year was it?
1996.
1996. I thought the back doors opened the opposite direction, but he tells me they didn't. It was a real classic. So I look at Frank, and I look at this car. And I look at Frank, and he was driving it. We've since shared together on numerous occasions lunch. I recently treated him and a former law school professor of mine who was a colleague of Frank's at the D.C. Court of Appeals, John Stedman, to a delightful lunch at the Army-Navy Club. The 3 of us had a blast that day. Judge Nebeker and I also had Florida in common, him at Marco Island and me at St. Petersburg. Chief Judge Nebeker worked tirelessly to build the court's infrastructure from scratch and continues to this day assisting the court as a senior judge. Suffice it to say that I am quite fond of Judge Nebeker simply because he is genuinely a kind and decent man. And I'm honored to be able to preside over this historic event in recognition of him today. We have a few speakers who will make remarks. Our first speaker is Marlene Davis, the former Deputy Executive Officer of the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims and the recipient of the Frank Q. Nebeker Outstanding Achievement Award. And I would ask Marlene to take the podium, please. You did. I saw you come in. I knew I could cut my remarks short.
Really?
No, it's the same. We just prettied it up a little bit,
It's
Marlene.
been changed, I know, I can tell. Oh, okay, so there are some waters up there. I'm very, very thrilled to be here today, and I'm
very happy that this is happening. I need my readers. Hi.
Right, Becky?
Right. I was the one to have the readers first. So I'll just keep delaying my fashionably late time while somebody answers their phone.
Arlene, I have my readers in my pocket if you need them. Mine's a 1.5 power, though.
Oh, you're really bragging, aren't you? 1.5. Well, anyway, I'm very happy to be here, and one of the reasons I'm happy to be here too is at one point I didn't think I was going to be here. I wouldn't have made it here, and I know many of you in here know that a few years after I retired, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And that was something that Judge Nebeker and I talked about on the phone when I called him, and we talked about it. We talked about the fact that we lost Judge Mankin, one of our judges, to pancreatic cancer. And when you have something like that, you don't expect that you'll live more than about 5 months. 6 years later, here I am. I'm a walking miracle. John Hopkins was truly good to me. I am a walking miracle, but this isn't about me today. This is about Judge Nebeker, and but the two of us have a journey together, and I want to talk about that journey. It's nice to see so many of my former friends and colleagues and co-workers and all the people that came back. I thought this was going to be an intimate affair. I walked in here. I'm dressed like a Rehoboth Beach person, and everybody's all dressed up. Oh my God. But I heard Judge Davis say, and Judge Davis, I think you were the newbie when I retired, and now we've done full circle, and you're the chief judge, so congratulations. It's wonderful. We talked about how tirelessly Judge Nebeker worked to put this court together, and I was sitting there going, yes, he did. And I think about how he really did work to put such a stellar group together in the beginning, and a magnificent staff of people. He had the perfect touch of gold, to do that. And he did we had a wonderful staff. And I think that's one of the reasons it came together so easily. But his and our journey started back in 1973 when I went to work for him at the D.C. Court of Appeals. I was working there as an administrative assistant to the clerk at that time, and his office was on the same floor as the clerk's office. Can you imagine that? As a judge, your office being on the same floor as the clerk's office? In the early times, none of the judges here wanted their office on the same floor as the clerk's office, but there are so many judges now. There must be a judge that is on the same floor as the clerk. I don't know. But he was on the same floor, and everybody got to know him, and everybody really loved him. And he would come in from time to time and ask me to take dictation, and I knew shorthand, and he would dictate a memo to me or a letter to me. And so his secretary decided to retire, and he interviewed me for the job. And I took the job as his secretary at that time at the D.C. Court of Appeals. So we worked together, but unfortunately, several years later, the White House came calling, the Office of Government Ethics, for him to be the director of the Office of Government Ethics. And so, luckily, he decided that he was going to take me with him, which was wonderful. But he told them, like he does, he's a man who's walks softly but carries a big stick. And he said, I'm coming, but I have 2 demands, that I'm bringing my administrative assistant with me, and she must have a supervisory position, and she must have a parking space. So, so you can see how you love this man, because on K Street Northwest, a parking space is like gold. And so we went to the Office of Government Ethics. Well, that was a very short 18 months we were there. And one day he walks into my office and he says, the White House came calling again, and he says, we're going to go build a federal court for veterans. And I just stood there and I said, we are? And he said, yes. And I said, he said, we're leaving. And it was only 18 months. We'd only been on the at OG for 18 months. And so there we were, 3 of us. Melanie Dorsey, there she is. Judge Nebeker and I. Three people. I remember standing in a building together, just the 3 of us, and it was an empty space. GSA had told us to go look at it. There's 3 of us to build this court. And that's how it started. And we went, but Judge Nebeker, anyway, he knew that this was easy. For him, easy peasy, we're going to get it done. It was going to be easy. Worry lines that never crossed his face. I got all his worry lines. Melanie probably got a few, and everybody else too at the same time. But we did our normal. Well, I did it. I wanted him to do it. Stealing of good people. Immediately, we stole Maria Ryan. Are you here, Maria? Now, Maria Ryan from the D.C. Court of Appeals to be our first operations manager. And I asked him about that. Could we steal her? He goes, that's a good idea. So I called her and said, would you like to come and help us start this new court? And she said, I'd love to. And then, I said, how about Becky over at OGE? Well, that was, oh, no, we can't do that. OGE will fall apart. It would take Becky. I said, no, it won't. And he said, yes, it will. We can't do that. I called Mrs. Nebeker. So the next day, he came in. He didn't know I called him. The next day he came in and said, you know what, Marlene, you're right. He said, call Becky if she wants to come and work with us. Well, she did. She wanted to very much, and she was already doing some work over there they didn't even know about. So at first, it was very overwhelming. Everything was overwhelming in the beginning. So much red tape, so much frustration, so much everything to go to. But Judge Nebeker was magnificent to work for. The staff was magnificent. He let us fly. He let us do. He wasn't a micromanager. Exactly 30 years ago, this past February, the trajectory of my career changed forever. From the day he hired me at the D.C. Court of Appeals, and it's definitely one of the reasons that I was thrilled to be here today and be able to be here today to see that you were dedicating this courtroom to him. I remember the day that our OGE designer, her name was Jewel McKee, she walked in here with me, and he said, as he did with all the little tasks, Marlene, take her over to the Supreme Court, show her the Supreme Court, show her how the curtains open and shut, show her how everything works over there. That's how I want our court to look like. Oh, okay. Yes, sir, I'll do that. So Joe McKee and I went over. I found somebody that would let us in over there. We went to the Supreme Court. We looked at the curtains. We did exactly what he wanted us to do. That's the way, you just do it. Don't go tell me A to Z, just do it and get it done. And that's the way he was. And but this was his baby. So we came back with wood samples and fabric samples and all the samples, the blueprint and everything. And then he went back to the Supreme Court and he took a look and he wanted to make sure everything was right down to the lectern, going up and down. Everything had to be perfect. This was his baby. And so everything came together. And that's why it's perfect that this is being named after him, because he really, really loved putting this together. And he really loved the fact that, it was sort of a replica of the Supreme Court that you're sitting in today. And it really is a replica. So, I used to tell Judge Nebeker when the older I got, the younger he was. And I remember he was only 48 years old when he hired me, and it just seemed like the time was flying by. But I watched him over 40 years and how he dealt with people, and I watched how he would deal with his law clerks. He would deal with problems and people. And I learned a lot from him, and I felt like he was the master. He was an extremely honorable man, and to say the Honorable Chief Judge Frank Q. Nebeker means exactly that. He was always an honorable man, and he gave me the career of a lifetime for which I'll always be grateful. And so I'm happy that you're honoring him today with this court. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene, for that window into history and those kind remarks. Alice, I hope you paid attention to what Marlene said about. I keep telling Alice all the time, the longer she works with me, the smarter she gets. Thank you, Marlene. Jamie Underwood, the partner in Latham and Watkins, and president of the Federal Circuit Bar Association, is a former judicial law clerk to Chief Judge Nebeker. Jamie?
Well, first let me say I am so happy to be back among all of you. This was really one of the most wonderful places that I've ever worked to date, and so it's fantastic to see everyone out in the audience, and even more fantastic to be here for such a wonderful celebration. I am here as the Federal Circuit Bar Association president, and we certainly appreciate all of the excellent work that this organization does every single day. But more importantly today, I have the great privilege of having worked with Chief Judge Nebeker as one of his very last law clerks. I consider myself extremely fortunate that I just got in there at the very last second. It was my pleasure to sit next to current Chief Judge Davis at a recent FCBA event, and he was telling me about this wonderful dedication. And he and my dear friend Alice Kearns were kind enough to ask me to say a few words. And there's so much to say, but I will keep it very brief. For me, Chief Judge Nebeker really embodies all of the most noble aspects of our profession. Service to others, dedication to improving the delivery of justice, and a commitment to training the next generation of legal professionals with both equal parts of wisdom and kindness. I knew when I was working here that he was an icon, but I didn't fully appreciate it. He was so good to his people, and he was so approachable that I think it actually took me to leave the court and get out of the nest and go out into the world to truly appreciate how amazing my experience was as his clerk. I think it's so fitting that this courtroom will carry his name. I think it will be an apt reminder that we should follow in his footsteps and zealously serve those who have served us all. So, Chief, Thank you for everything that you did, the pivotal role that you took in helping this court become what it is today, and thank you for touching the lives of myriad individuals throughout your long and successful career. The folks in the packed courtroom, I think, says it all. Thank you.
Jamie, thank you for those kind remarks, and thank you for taking the time to present today. Our next speaker is Judge John J. Foley III, the third judge to be confirmed and the one who actually fulfilled the requirement for a quorum to allow the court to begin operations. And Jack will tell you that there would be no court without him. So. Oh,
Chief Judge Davis, Chief Judge Nebeker, Chief Judge Blackburn-Rigsby, Chief Judge Kramer, Chief Judge Ivers, Chief Judge Green, Chief Judge Hagel. Did I miss any, Chief? My fellow non-chief judges. EDA Chair Mason. Members of the Nebeker family. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd like to begin with a word of praise for Chief Judge Davis, the Board of Judges, and all those who put this wonderful event together. Their timing was impeccable. Just a few weeks ago, the Smithsonian Institution established, to great press attention, its old fossil hall. Today, the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, by naming this courtroom, the Honorable Frank Quill Nebeker, is establishing its very own old fossil hall. When I was given this assignment by Chief Judge Davis, I was not too thrilled with the prospect of trying to excite a group at Frank's and mine siesta time after lunch and purporting to introduce to you a man who's been sitting up there on the bench staring at you for over half an hour. I find myself in the position of the 10th husband of a Hollywood actress on their wedding night. I know what I was supposed to do. I know how to do it. I just hope I can make it interesting. Actually, I must confess to a little disappointment, as Chief Judge Davis hinted at. I was sort of expecting that this courtroom was going to be named after me. Because I'm the one responsible for the creation of the court. And Frank became the chief judge. Then Ken Kramer and I were nominated together. We had a joint hearing, and we were confirmed on the same day. But because Ken was older than me, much older, I think it's something like 6 months. He was 5 months? Thank you, Becky. He was senior to me, and I was low man on the original totem pole. But 3 judges were indeed required for the court to open its doors and conduct business, so it could not have opened without me. For that reason, I, as the 3rd judge, take full credit for establishing the court. Of course, nobody gives me credit, but I take it anyway. Almost 19 years ago, I was returning from a training session with the California County Veteran Services officers changing planes in Denver, I called in, and I learned that I would have the opportunity to say a few words about Chief Judge Nebeker at a ceremony marking the passing of his gavel to incoming Chief Judge Ken Kramer. I tried to think of a theme. I couldn't. I got on the plane, probably had a drink or two. Finally, an hour or so into the flight, the movie came on. It was The Field of Dreams. And I knew I'd found my muse. The subplot of the movie was baseball, which provided a delicious sense of irony, because Frank cares nothing about baseball. Or any other sport, for that matter, except maybe fishing. As wonderfully diverse and eclectic as his mind and his interests, sports play no role, except when he has to duck balls thrown at him by his grandchildren. But the message of that fable, the parable, that is The Field of Dreams, has a far broader application than just baseball. And with the possible exception of Frank, I'm sure almost all of us have seen the movie and remember its whispered driving force. If you build it, they will come. This court may have been created by Congress, but Frank was its builder. He built the court, and over 85,000 disabled veterans who had no place to go before did indeed come. Frank was the perfect choice as the founding chief judge for a new appellate court. He had worked in the vineyards of appellate practice for his entire tenure in D.C., which, as we know, has lasted well over 100 years, since the time of the great Chief Justice, John Marshall, who was a friend of his. Having been a prime mover in the physical building of the courthouse across the street, Frank's expertise was quickly put to use when we moved from K Street to this location on the edge of Judiciary Square. But of more significance is the leadership and guidance he provided to court personnel and to judges as we began our new venture. It was, for the most part, a gentle type of leadership. He listened, and thus he taught us to listen. He worked to build consensuses. Now, I looked that up. My Latin told me that should be consensi. Well, it's not. It's consensuses. He worked to build consensuses without letting his ego intrude. And he taught us how to be appellate judges by introducing us to friends of his from around the country and educating us at seminars put on by the ABA's Appellate Judges Seminar System. Or he could be firm if he thought it necessary, but it was the firmness of a parent, not an adversary. And he brought with him that magnificent cadre of experienced court officers. Melanie, later Becky, Inga, and of course the twin terrors, Marlene and Darlene. We were all scared stiff of them all. Frank, I gratefully acknowledge my personal debt and gratitude to you. And I think I can even go further and say on behalf of all veterans, thank you for building us our own Field of Dreams. In closing, I think it's proper that the last words should be Frank's, as they always are. The last words should be Frank's. At his final judicial conference as Chief Judge, he closed his remarks in this way. I am proud to say that the court, through its judges, has, with the appropriate and unhindered exercise of independence, brought the administration of veterans' benefits under the rule of law. I leave the court with respect for and thanks to my judicial and non-judicial colleagues, and with confidence that they will carry on in the finest tradition of the judiciary. Thank you.
Judge Farley, thank you for your wit and those remarkable words and tributes to Judge Nebeker, and I'm so glad you're able to join us today. I have a order to present to Judge Nebeker, and I'll read it. On July 25th, 1989, the Honorable Frank Q. Nebeker was sworn in as the first Chief Judge of the then newly created United States Court of Veterans' Appeals. With a handful of administrative staff, he spent the first several months of his appointment setting up the court. On October 16, 1989, in a ceremony presided over by Chief Justice William Rehnquist, Judges Kenneth B. Kramer and John J. Farley III were invested as the second and third judges of the new court. Chief Judge Nebeker then convened the court for the first time and commenced its operations. Chief Judge Nebeker oversaw all facets of creating a new federal court without antecedent. The court received its first appeal in November of 1989, issued its first opinion in December of 1989, and heard its first oral argument in February of 1990. The court moved into its current location at 625 Indiana Avenue in November of 1990, and in 1999, the court's name was changed to the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. As the only judge of the court appointed as Chief Judge, Judge Nebeker served in that role for 11 years, more than twice as long as any who have followed him. Chief Judge Nebeker retired from active service in November of 2000. He is currently a senior judge of the court and periodically serves in recall status. The court wishes to recognize and honor the dedicated service of this extraordinary jurist and the court's first chief judge. It's therefore fitting that in this, the court's 30th year, the courtroom of the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims be named the Honorable Frank Q. Nebeker Courtroom. So ordered.
Thank you, Bob.
We have one last presentation before I turn the podium over to Judge Nebeker, Chief Judge Nebeker. And I'll ask Judge Greenberg if he would provide remarks and make a presentation.
The court has struck a commemorative medal to honor this occasion and the occasion of the 30 years of this court. The first medal, which I have in my hand, has on one side the seal of the court celebrating 30 years, and on the other side the names of all 21 judges with their dates of commission and the 21 seals of the various military and government agencies that are part of our jurisdiction. I should like to commend Mr. Block, who administered the process, Michael Bazinski, who was responsible for the design, and Carrie Sklar of our staff, who got the necessary okays from the various agencies. It's entirely fitting that you have the first of the medals. We've ordered hundreds of them, which will be subject to, I'm sure, a tariff before they arrive, for presentation in November. But I also would like to close by noting that on the back of your program you have the history of Chief Judge Nebeker, but this commemorative medal actually is an indirect recognition of the president who gave him his first job, Martin Van Buren.
You're all part.
Thank you, Judge Greenberg. Chief Judge Nebeker.
Chief Judge Davis, judges of this court, Chief Judge Blackburn Rigsby, and my colleagues on the D.C. Court of Appeals, my family and my friends. The idea and purpose of this ceremony was a complete surprise to me when Chief Judge Davis called me last winter and broached the idea. My first thought was, with a name like Nebeker, would it look strange above a courtroom door, in the nation's capital particularly? But I then thought back on how I got my first name. I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and there are a lot of Nebekers out that way. That day, my father encountered his cousin, a Frank K. Nebeker, and that's how I got my first name. Frank K. had been a prominent lawyer in Utah when the 16th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified in 1913. He was sent by the Mormon Church to look after the church's business affairs. Frank K. Nebeker later became an assistant attorney general. I met him the first and only time when my wife and I, Lou, came to D.C. in 1953. When we visited his home, Northwest Washington, he was sitting in his study, and I could see through an open door, that he pushed a full cocktail glass beneath his chair. He had assumed I was a Mormon who took a dim view of alcohol. Little did he know. I then learned that Nebeker had been a treasurer of the United States. I had seen a treasury note with his signature. Subsequently, I learned that another Nebeker had been appointed by the President of the United States to be United States Marshal for the territory which was shortly to become the Four Corners area of the country. The Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico borders converge at Four Corners. Well, enough of that. When I was asked by the White House if I would be interested in becoming the first chief judge of the court, I hadn't even heard of the court. I requested time to learn about it. And I learned then that this court became the first judicial review of denial of veterans benefits. Before that time, no review by anybody than the Veterans Appeals Board. The court was first time since 1950 when the Court of Military Appeals was created. There are now 8 such courts without antecedent entity. The court began, as you've been told, in 1989 at 1625 K Street, an office building. GSA had been tasked by the statute creating the court to find space for the court in the District of Columbia. We could not go into the suburbs. That came as a surprise to the GSA when I told the manager of his assigned duty. He offered the Buzzards Point location. Those of you who were here back then perhaps can remember Buzzards Point was a tough neighborhood. I turned it down because of that fact. The GSA people said, "We don't have any other place for you." I said, "Oh, yes, you do." Because I knew that, as you've been told, the Office of Government Ethics vacated those offices on 1625 K Street. And Marlene Davis and Becky Alexander and our first clerk moved there. I appointed Bob Camo, who is here with us today, as my chief executive officer. We built a makeshift courtroom and began a law library by purchasing what turned out to be some useless Fed Second volumes from a law firm upstairs. There was at that time, of course, no computerized law research, and so they were at least better than nothing. Later, after 4 more judges were appointed, we moved to this location, and we are the first tenants in this building. When one begins to a brand new courtroom, the problems are many, ranging from furnishings to parking and finding an official reporter of decisions to adopting rules of appellate procedure. Luckily, as you've been told, I had been involved in the appellate judges seminar series and thus became good friends of the president and staff of the West Publishing Company. West promptly agreed to be our reporter of decisions in the Vet Apt volumes. With the willing and able help of Judges Kramer and Farley, incidentally, I have a new name for Judge Farley, knowing his health background. It's Jack Phoenix III Farley. Jack, God, it's good to be here with you. Well, we proceeded with that help of those 2 judges to appoint Mellon Davis as our first law clerk, our first clerk of court. She had been a law clerk for former Judge Stanley Harris of the D.C. Court of Appeals and the United States District Court here in town. She soon resigned for health reasons, and we, the judges, appointed Bob Camo as our clerk. Before I close, I would like to acknowledge the presence of J. Michael Hannon. Mike was one of my early law clerks and former assistant U.S. attorney, an outstanding one at that. And he then joined a prominent law firm. Well, in the meantime, we got a case on this court called Gardner versus Dowinski. I don't have the citation as you had your citation. Look it up. The secretary had denied Gardner's claim for additional disability benefits because of a year-old limitation on hospital injuries to medical malpractice. He had been injured being transported in a VA hospital hallway. I don't know whether he ran into the wall, somebody ran into him, or what. But in any event, the statute provided disabilities caused by treatment at a VA hospital would be treated as service-connected. Well, we got this case of Gardner, and I recognized right away he was without counsel, and he needed counsel. So I convinced Mike Hannon to accept the appointment pro bono, and we reversed the secretary's administrative decision because, and I thought this was important, the secretary had appealed this court's decision to the Federal Circuit, which he had a right to do. Some appeals may be taken to the Federal Circuit. Mike handled that appeal too. He had found out he grabbed a bear by the tail and couldn't let go. Well, the Secretary of VA convinced the President to convince the Solicitor General to petition for review in the Supreme Court. Mike briefed and argued that case, and the court unanimously affirmed the 2 lower courts. Chief Justice Rehnquist, in rejecting the Secretary's claim of deference to the regulation, said it was the product of a splendid isolation from the years of no judicial review, and thus no deference was due to that regulation and the Secretary's argument. I don't know whether Mike used that phrase when he argued that case or in his brief before the court, but he is capable of such eloquence. My service to veterans came only through this court in 1989. I am proud to have served them. It was little enough for the sacrifices of so many. We should all be grateful that we can serve our veterans on this court. I am thankful that my life has been prolonged to this day. Thank you all for the honor.
Thank you very much, Chief Judge Nebeker. When you leave this ceremony today, please notice the beautiful lettering on the wood paneling that now says, "The Honorable Frank Q. Nebeker Courtroom." In closing, as you can see, it took a very special person to carry out the assignment of standing up a brand new federal court of appeals. And Frank Nebeker was just such a person. It took a diplomat, a negotiator, someone with a keen intellect, a hard worker, someone who was relentless and knew his way around Capitol Hill and Washington, D.C. In a word, it took a real gentleman. Chief Judge Nebeker, we're very honored that you are here with us today.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I do have special instructions as we adjourn the ceremonial session. First, I need everyone's cooperation on exiting the courtroom because all of the current and past court staff and judges have a very special photo session planned immediately on leaving the courtroom downstairs outside in front of the building. So when I say these magic words, the ceremonial session is now adjourned, if you would please allow all current and past judges and staff to leave the courtroom first, that would be greatly appreciated. For guests and all other attendees, after the current and past court staff have left, please join us for a reception on the second floor of this building in our multi-purpose room. So when I say the ceremonial session is now adjourned, you may proceed directly to the second floor reception. If anyone would like to take pictures with Judge Nebeker in front of the courtroom by his name, please see him after he returns from the photo session, and I am sure he will be happy to accommodate pictures there. Frank, I want to be in line for that.
Indeed you shall.
Okay. All court staff, whether or not physically at the ceremony, are encouraged to be a part of the photo shoot outside in front of the building. And thank you again to our wonderful court staff for helping to put this program together. Thank you all very much for attending and making this a special session. The ceremonial session is now adjourned.